Welcome to CarlDeGregorio's Session 69. 69. Yeah, 69. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to be crass. I'm not going to talk about 69, which is 69 in French. Probably a French thing to begin with, if you know what I'm saying. I told you I wasn't going to talk about it. Let's grow up. You know what I mean? This is serious. You know, one of the many great things about being a couple for a long time is the lore that develops between you two and the inside jokes, right? And very rarely, and maybe even in this case, they are ever transferable as actual bits to the populace. But because I just made a reference to myself with the 69 and not making fun of 69, and I don't, again, I'm sure there is a football player with 69 as we speak. I know there's probably a movie character. I'm guessing, this is a guess without a Google search, I'm thinking, no, that wouldn't make sense either because he was a linebacker. I was going to say that the Jon Favreau character in The Replacements might have had a 69 number because he was a douche and the character would probably have a 69, but I am probably wrong about that. Either way, we are on the 69th episode, which is closing in on another, 10 piece for next week. But so far, 69 is, and I need to get back to the point about serious business. I think it refers to those moments when, as you age or as you become more like your father and the things you used to make fun of him, you actually perpetrate later in life. The idea of being able to concentrate when people are talking or when the radio's on in the car, that sort of jumbled processing, and you get pissed off. And I remember either it was I was trying to parallel park on a very busy street or do some kind of maneuver, and my girlfriend was saying something, and I said, listen, I need to focus on this. This is serious business. I literally said the phrase serious business. And so now we make fun of me in perpetuity and make fun of that notion in that moment. And I guess one of the cognitive things that it does, if I really think about it, is if I'm about to bug out and I can get my memory and my mind back to this is serious business, which was true at the time and is true sometimes when you're driving and you're lost and things like that, but it doesn't need to be blurted out in rage. It doesn't need to be an argument in the car, and you don't need to panic sometimes on the road, obviously, or in life, right? So if I can get to the point where I say this is serious business, I can laugh at my previous folly and my previous rigidity and my previous, meltdown. And it's almost like I've come up with like a mnemonic or a, one of these things that they use in self-realization, in sort of mindfulness and things like that, where you say, who told you that, or, you identify a negative thought and or any of the things, snapping a fucking rubber band on your wrist, saying, no, thanks. That's not true. Is that true? All these things. And so if I say this is serious business, that can stop me. And so I guess on the goofiest number of 69, trying to be serious and trying to make this about something, it brought me to that. And that also with the 69 reminds me of what they say about mastering a language. The last thing, and sometimes even the last thing that will come to you. I never got fluent. My sister's fluent in Spanish, but I never got fluent in any language. But they say that numbers are the last thing. And there are some people who are highly, highly proficient. They've been in another country. They have mastered the language for all intents and purposes. And yet they still add, subtract, count, do money and things like that in their native tongue. So 69 is significant because the joking matter of it, the fact that 60 is very nice and 69 is, and then it means something in the 8th grade lexicon of being a douche and being a total juvenile with your learning, but that's how things stick, and it's the only number I know. I know 14 in 14 in Spanish because I wear a size 14. Do you know what I mean? And I always say when the guys at work would fuck with me and say, "Look at the size of your feet," I say 14, papa, and they'd be like, "Oh, chingon," shit like that. So these are the ways I get into memory. But what it really comes down to, I would think, and what I hope and what I'm after, and why maybe sometimes I talk about music a lot and I talk about film and I boil things down and I try to get inside. I am very verbal and I'm using a very wordy and verbose way of communicating on this. But really what I respond to in most things is communication of feelings, sometimes past the point of words, and it's really just communicating. And so bonding and communicating and being able to riff with people and talk with people. Like I said, I know enough Spanish to get through a night at work in a restaurant. I know enough French because that was what I studied to probably, not get be able to find out who spoke English, and if they'd even deign to speak French with me, I could be a tourist, maybe. And things come back to you once you would ever go there. I've never been in a French-speaking country other than Quebec in Canada. But the idea that it's about communicating, and that essentially my desire, my burning need to be like funny in another language, to bond with someone, to be sort of self-sufficient maybe in a way by, using every means of expression, even though that's the thing. I know if I could get a little bit more vocabulary, I could probably figure it out more than I currently do. And none of it would be at the level of being to enjoy this in another language, or someone having a conversation at this rate of speech. I don't have that ability, but if by hook or by crook I could find a way. And I used to joke, there was a time I was on a subway platform and a tourist had no English and then was trying to understand where the fuck to go in the subway, and they were miserably failing and I was miserably failing back. But part of me was like, this person's not I basically said to my friends, this person was dumb. This was a baseline not bright person, because I was trying to go like up for uptown, down for downtown, using, like, we were doing this brutal, and they weren't picking up on anything, and I wasn't communicating anything. So I'll take the blame too. But I was just like, what are the universal ways, and what are the and maybe nerves were in the case, and maybe it was such a far away language, and so that there was nothing that could be done. But I felt like, man, we are missing a chance here because of some kind of stubbornness, or we're missing some kind of universal, they have arrows in other countries and stuff. So I thought up and down would be, where are you trying to go? Point on the fucking map. Like it was complete non-communicating, and it was frustrating for me. And I said, I tried, and I guess the next step would have been to go where they thought they needed to go, but they couldn't even tell me where they thought they needed to go. And I was frustrated. But my desire, and I think it's a desire that comes from being maybe a child with older siblings and older parents, that even when I was pre-verbal, I probably wanted to join in. And so my desire to communicate, or to find any means of expression, to be heard, to be understood, probably was a clue that I might have thought about. The idea of another language would have really been something I could have taken seriously. But, it's such a shame that you have to do school when your nervous system is all jacked up, and when you're sleep deprived and you're growing too fast. All these things, if I could have started high school at like 11 a.m., I would have, and go till about 4. It would have worked out a lot better for me, and it did okay. But that was really a slog to get through the first part of the day and mornings, and just having energy, and then maybe I was even narcoleptic. It felt like, because I was either bouncing off the walls or asleep, and I would fall asleep in class, and it was crazy because I guess, playing sports and I was growing quickly and all that stuff, and I had injuries, and but I got through it. I did well, but I didn't know at the time that maybe having another language would expand something for me, would make it easier to communicate with more people. And if I hope to one day be a great communicator, which may have been where acting really kind of turned me on, was to be a communicator. And so with 69, the 69th episode, talking about the wish to communicate, I think that's a good lesson to, and maybe why book writing and getting back into my one-man show, like, there's gotta be things that are communicable, there are gotta be things that are transferable the reason I wish music was my real gift was because that is what they call the universal language. But I would also say that today, maybe not on stage, but in the world of digital media, you can translate almost at will. And certainly Netflix has, I've auditioned for many dubbing jobs. So every movie and a lot of the big hits on Netflix have been foreign films that were, essentially essentially the world media is what, it involves. I can just tell you can tell I just shut down. It's because the Pavlovian response to a text coming through, and I haven't disconnected text on the desktop. Isn't that funny? I'm talking about digital media. I get a digital prompt, and it's, who the fuck knows who it's from. I don't want to break the spell that I create here, and maybe that's why I should have the cans and also make sure your notifications are off and all that stuff. But what I'm trying to say is that, thank God, maybe we're in an era where foreign films or foreign TV shows, Squid Games and stuff like that, can be popular because of the instant dubbing and access in multiple languages and translations. It would be hard to do live. But you do want to write things that are, if you were watching a scene, you might not know the words, you'd know it was a breakup. Do you know what I mean? You're watching a scene, you don't know the language, you know it's a soldier coming home from war. And so when people say music is the universal language or sports is the universal language, they never say that, like, acting is the universal language. But I think storytelling is a universal language, because how the hell do you pick up what they're putting down on a cave drawing or on a carving? The story is a flood, right? We know that the floods are origin story in most texts and cultures and religious texts, that there was a flood, right? There's something universal there. And that's why I was frustrated when I was trying to go, like, you trying to go uptown or you trying to go downtown? Not like vertical, but in New York, it's up number, down number, and they weren't putting that together. And so maybe there was a million things that this person wasn't picking up on. So I was like, we're kind of stuck. And one of the fondest memories, and I used to do a joke about giving yourself too much credit, right? Because you can talk poorly to yourself, and then you can have delusions of your own brilliance. But it was, when you ever, the bit, and it wasn't really a bit, it was a half-formed idea, but the idea was the rare time you bag your own groceries before self-checkout, and you'd be bagging your own groceries and you get it so stacked up right, and you use only one bag, and you're like, man, look at the way I did this. They never do it this way. I should have been an engineer, right? You go right from packing a bag of groceries efficiently to putting a bridge across the Golden Gate, And so, we do that to ourselves. And so maybe this is an example of me overestimating myself, but maybe even me equivocating it before I tell the story is me shit-talking myself or downplaying it. But I do remember this exchange was sort of the counter to being frustrated on the subway platform, because I couldn't communicate with this person, and I could communicate with this next one. I was at work, and we had one TV, and there was a basketball game on. This is going back the Kobe Bryant Lakers days. So, we're talking 10 years, maybe more. And there was a deaf person at the bar at the end, and I think it was either after dinner or he wasn't originally. I think he was waiting for his date to come out of the bathroom, and the he was just leaning on the bar waiting, maybe picking his teeth or whatever. But he was definitely deaf, because I saw him talking to people before he was, he was doing his ASL, and he was watching the game just like I was, and it was slow enough that I saw him. I asked if he, you need anything. I threw a napkin down. That's nonverbal. No, I'm good. And then, I said, how was food? Good. And I don't have ASL, but I have charades, and I have, what I bring to the thing. And he's like, oh, it was great. And, and that's dialogue, whether there's words, and that's a great lesson for storytelling. And whether before you write words, you have to make sure, are you communicating, in your scripts and stuff like that, which was why a one-man show is really tricky, because it's only you know what I mean? And why it ultimately might be a flawed program. But thinking about it, and thinking about acting, and thinking about communicating, that's how we were conversing, with a guy who couldn't, was non-verbal, or did ASL, and and then there was something happened on the game, and I don't know why I took a chance, and I pointed, because I was right next to the TV, and Kobe was either at the foul line or something. I wasn't a Kobe fan back in the day, and I pointed at him, and I'm like basically like, I'm not feeling that guy. And he said, yeah, me too. Basically he shoots too much, and we both laughed and we chuckled, and we were talking about how we didn't like Kobe Bryant in the game, as a Knicks fan, and I don't know who his team was, and so we had a cool little interaction. It might have got me through the night. His girlfriend or wife returned from the bathroom, so then there was a person with ASL, but a hearing person, and then it was pretty quick, like, okay, man, good to see you, thanks. And she was like, nice, thank you, and she was verbal and he wasn't, and that exchange ended. And now it's also, I just felt like I wanted to communicate at that point. And you can tell a vibe is cool. I think the guy had a cool vibe, so I might not have spoken to every, and that's the idea of pedestaling, person with some disability or whatever. It's like he was cool regardless. And I bet you if I had a bad vibe on somebody also hearing or deaf or hearing impaired, I might have said, fuck, that guy seems strange. I'm not going to go talk to that guy. But part of the pride I have, and the pride and the competition I used to have when playing charades or even theater games, like the idea of winning or being able to get the clue, or just that sort of game show communicating feel, or whatever it might have been. I was just very urgently wishing to make sure that we understood each other while we were there, and it was without language shared. And I don't know, like I learned a few things about ASL during that Coda movie, which was a mind blower. I love that movie. One of those movies you only watch once because it's very intense. But Coda, child of a deaf adult. I don't know if that's what brought it up, but there's a thing in sign language I learned, that even if you can hear, but ASL, you're part of the deaf community if you know ASL. And I thought that was interesting. And it's a beautiful language if you get me. It's very expressive, and because it's nonverbal and very expressive, it's there's something captivating about it. And anyway, he didn't, and I don't know if it was offensive. Think about it. It would be like saying, I don't know if you ever noticed this phenomenon when I have a neighbor. His name's Christian, but because he's Italian, is Christian, and I think, when I see him, I'm like, what's up, Christian? But when my girlfriend sees him, she's like, what's up, Christian? And I'm like, his name hasn't changed. It's just he says it with an accent, and it's still Christian. So are you you know what I'm saying? It's that thing of like, why do you have an accent? You're mocking their accent because the dude's name is Christian. You know what I'm saying? And I stepped in it one time because there was a person I knew, his name was Sarah, but was, I think, French or maybe European, and But the way the person who introduced me said it, they were saying it like Syrah, like Syra, like the wine Syrah. And I'm like, is your name Syrah? And they're like, she's like, no, it's Sarah, but she's a Sarah, and she had the. So I'm like, it's this weird disconnect, and that stuff cracks me up. And I hope that the equivalent of talking in a fucked up accent is to do like pig Latin hand signals to a person who does sign language. But the guy seemed to be cool, and if there is a sensitivity or a nose turned up to the hearing, and that weird kind of like you're not part of the community thing, if that came up, this guy was cool and he wouldn't have been down with it. And I could a lot of that is projecting, but I also think a lot of it was just that he was a sports fan and I wanted to bond, and I took a chance on shit talking Kobe, which is tough, dangerous stuff to do in LA at the time and still today. And then, of course, with his tragedy, I came full circle to respect his tenacity and his work ethic, and about how trying to decimate your opponent is actually giving them your best. And if everybody did that, like, just it's actually respect in a weird way. Not to get off on that tangent, but again, it all went down to wanting to communicate so badly, to be heard, to cross over, to be able to like bond with a deaf dude, and it's why I think in many ways, it's why I absorb so much material and have over the years, because I like to have a point of reference when I meet somebody, and I like it to be more than surface. And so, and it'll backfire, right? You get all fucking, what's the word? My buddy Raul does a bit about, being a hack. So like you go to Amsterdam and you talk about the red light district. It's like, it's like asking someone, oh, you're from Santa Monica, you're from LA, how's Skid Row? It's like, you got to dig a little deeper. So I like to have a database, or I like to, feel worldly, and it's a really good way in. It's probably my need to communicate, my need to be known as having a bright, a bright mind that has been worldly, even though I haven't really traveled that much. Certainly when I'm, my African American end of things is I have a deep knowledge of some of that music culture and some of that person to person stuff, and I used it to my advantages in having basically my in-laws and knowing a lot and a lot of my friendships, and that's given me like inside scoop, which is eventually with all this digitizing and the way social media works, this stuff winds up becoming mainstream, right? And so my little pockets of knowledge become, for them, everyone has it. And that's the lament of becoming obsolete, or the lament of any kind of search engine or database that puts it at the fingertips. My already having it, and my slower recall, though pretty quick recall, is only really good at a trivia thing. And then what happens is you go to some of these trivia things, and it's randomly outside of your expertise, right? I'm not going to be able to tell you about, biblical verses or elements on the periodic table. Mine tend to lean toward the pop culture, obviously. And then everybody's got pockets and spheres of knowledge. And try guessing what won the fucking Academy Award in 2018. There's this weird recency bias, like I can't remember what won last year, you know what I mean? I don't want to even spend time on this vlog thinking about it, because I would be frozen in a when it was a Nora. So I was doing, I was vamping, which is a technique I wish I would have learned in stand-up, because a lot of times on longer sets and out of town gigs, you get paralyzed in fear of like what comes next. Don't do your don't do your closer till you get the light, but then you kind of don't have the light, and you're talking and you're trying to verbalize and stay in the moment, but also what the fuck comes next, so you can put yourself at ease. And it's this tightrope you're walking up there, because I never memorized my stand-up like a script, which will be interesting because I'm going to, ultimately memorize my one-man show like a script. But I'm sure there'll be some fallow moments of memory and panic moments like an actor's nightmare that always afflicts you. But, but I just was using words and I was vamping to come up with a Nora. But that was last year, and we're getting into award season now, and it's, you hope that you can stave off decline and maybe the ginkgo biloba or whatever I need to get a supplement, because I really want to be able to, be at my best as we've talked about previously. If late blooming is what's going to, be the inevitable, late blooming is, I'm going to need my memory to last a little longer, because knock on wood and from my lips to God's ears, that, acting work is on the horizon, and hopefully enough that it's going to be some demands on my memory, and my acting coaching kind of career started last year with a working actor preparing for a role that he already had, and it started out as basically just helping him run lines over Zoom. But as I was inevitably opinionated and he was gracious enough to take my opinion, it became more than that. And we did, it became sort of performance coaching, putting him in a mindset for what would happen on the set. And then, seeing it all the way through to finally seeing the finished product. The guessing you do and and the things that were omitted. It was a learning experience for both, for me mostly. I mean, working actors have a different expectation when they are working on scenes. You don't want to be too married to things because the director's going to have a say, but it's television, so you have to be basically prepared, and they're not going to discuss analysis or whatever it might be, or motivation. And maybe they do in some rare cases, and also things are going to change. And really what you need to do is be so facile or so agile with your preparation that if they change it from a walk and talk to a scene in a car, and if they, and all of that stuff, you have to really be, pliable that way, flexible, not married to anything, able to turn on a dime. That happened to me in when I did Room 104, which was an HBO show by the Duplass brothers. It was an anthology, so every week it was set in the same Room 104 in a kind of rundown motel, but a different cast, different characters, different story each week, kind of like a Twilight Zone. And when I got to set, I had there was a line in the script about, and it wasn't my line, it was me being too heady, but I said something. It was a husband and a wife arguing. And I said something about her, like, always putting her big tits out there, to secure a deal or whatever. And then she goes, oh, okay, well, like, you don't do that Southern boy charm shit. So I heard Southern boy charm. And so I did the whole audition. I did everything with a Southern accent. Slight, like a little lilt, like a gentleman, like I do, not a widow girl, but like a, like a Southern gentleman, like someone who might be south of the Mason-Dixon line, but, was an investor, that kind of thing. I had a little bit on there, a little like halfway down on the accelerator with it. And we're literally just circling up to do a run through for lines with the sides on the set. And the director's like, are you doing a Southern accent? And I said, yeah. And she goes, can you drop it? And I'm like, yeah, because I'd prepared it so well that I just dropped it, And then she's like, you know what? Let's have you putting on some, like, they threw everything at me, and all the blocking and all the things that you had to know, all of that had to come with the preparation being so locked in that it didn't throw me whatsoever. Unfortunately, the other actress was not as well prepared, had to basically learn her lines on the fly, and wouldn't get them the same every night, every take. And we had enough takes where I had to, and it was a great exercise in me listening, because she had cues that in her line, I had to repeat what she said and say it back to her, and she would change it. So I couldn't I mean, what purpose? That's the other thing, is like there's no right in lines, because if she says you didn't listen to my heartache, and I'm supposed to say your heartache, and if she said you didn't listen to my woe, and then I say your heartache, like that's a clear evidence of me not listening. So she's like, you didn't listen to my woe, and I said your woe, I would have to do that, and it would change kind of every take. And so, and the beauty of it was I went kind of method or in the moment with it. It was pissing me off, and I had to slam a door, and I literally rattled the set a couple of times, because it was each take she was putting me through it, because she was fumbling, and I had to kind of drive the scene. And it was an argument, so it all worked out. And the beauty of it, and it's the thing I learned, is like, from my need to communicate, my need to be seen, maybe that little need that you're trying to scratch with an acting career, or with your wish to be some deaf guy's best friend, or whatever it might be, to be 69, it dawned on me that, like, I had no idea that maybe the director was picking up everything I was, but their job is just to get it done and to patch it together. And there was no panic, and they weren't pissed off at the actress, because they knew that would probably make it worse. And they're not married to the text like a good theater trained actor is going to maybe sometimes be. And I think a lot of theater trained actors that you then see, one of the cool things that the internet has brought on social media, I don't know if you've seen, and maybe it's just in my algorithm, but they'll have a split screen. They'll have the scene in the actual finished film, and then they'll have the script going there. And so you see from page to screen, and many examples of it. You'll see it. And I watch those, and then I watch them from, I guess, a script supervisor point of view, and it depends on who the writer and the director are. And it's usually the lead actors who are movie stars. They take liberties, and not liberties. They take their time. If the character's not communicative, it's not word for word, at least for some, and then the others are. And it's fascinating, because I think they have a little bit of clout on the set, and they're really going for truth and not word perfect. Obviously, somebody like Aaron Sorkin demands that. There's certain, Quentin Tarantino demands word perfect. So, but in those sort of, and as long as you're not going, I'm talking about like making a contraction out of do not, don't, and the example they had on this most recent one I can think of is from Train Dreams, Joel Edgerton and the Kate Condon, I think, the uncredited woman in the film, and they show it's a very emotional scene, and I don't want to spoil it. It's my favorite movie so far of the year. Oddly enough, I auditioned for it, which was a big get and a big milestone, but I didn't get it, and maybe thank God, because the guy that got it was barely seen and a little more rough and tumble than I was. But I was in the ballpark. It was in terms of my interpretation, I'll say. And that's why I bring it up. But I don't bring it up only to get that anecdote in, which is ultimately a no-go for me. So I don't know why. I'm not trying to humble brag, because it didn't lead to a gig, but it's why I probably had a vivid connection to the material, because I did the research. I bought a Kindle version of the novella the book was based on, to just figure out a few things that weren't in my little sides, that you only get very short sides for ancillary characters. But all I'm saying is that he wasn't married to the words with any particular reverence. And I know Joel Edgerton is a fine actor and a very trained one, but he's also been a lead actor for a very long time. So I doubt the script supervisor is really going to check him for reversing words or rephrasing. Oddly enough, the female actress in the scene, she was more word perfect. And so I don't know if that's her process or his process is different. All I'm saying is, in this instance on my set, the director, it's small fish, it's small potatoes. It's not the primary. My primary concern was being a good actor, maybe getting another gig from it, showing I was prepared, maybe getting somehow extended, all these things going through my head. And I was aghast at the lack of preparation on the other end. And then that's where you understand that you're a special teams player. You're not the quarterback, because the director didn't have time to really belabor this. And it wasn't about justice, and it wasn't about me being patted on the back. It was, how far can we take it before the scene falls apart because she's not putting it together. And thank God I was there and I did my job. And, you know, it was a very good lesson, because even with that pseudo catastrophe on their hands, they still got it in the can. They still worked. They still produced their final project. And so it was a good lesson in knowing that, it's still not a bad thing for you to be prepared, and you can't control other people. And it winds up also being, if you're going to be in solution, not problem, me raising up and shaming somebody or saying, you understand she doesn't know her shit, right? I mean, like, what was the point of that, you know? And so, and honestly, it didn't show. So it was me being a stickler for a stickler's sake, and wanting more out of the experience than could even be squeezed out of it. And so thank God I'm learning some of this stuff before I take some of that need-based stuff onto sets, because it really is a profession, and it really is not about you. And certainly if you want to be, if you want it to be about you, you probably want to be a director or a producer or a star actor and a producer. But a lot of that, otherwise, it's very, very small what your contribution is to it. So much so that you think not knowing your lines could derail the whole thing, and they still can grind it out. So it's really a collaboration, and you're really there to do a small part of it. And so thankfully I'm learning all this stuff before I get big cracks at it. And it's just, there is a lot of information out there. And I guess if I stay off the social media gossip train, there are a lot of resources out there. And so I'm going to try to keep my algorithm on that and try to learn from that. And also know that my will to communicate might be something that is, I don't know, usable somewhere, somehow. It's probably why I've faded a little bit. I haven't been as social because of my being out of the restaurant business, which, if nothing else, is very social, whether you want to be or not, which is then the hard part when you're not up to it. You know, coming home from my father's funeral and I wasn't around, the first question I got was, how was your vacation? I'm like, you're my vacation. You know, those grueling shifts where you really can't handle being there are they're tough. But it is social. In the great show The Bear, I think Carmy has the line, he's like, one thing about this business is you're never alone. And that's true. So, that work from home in your pajamas and start to squirrel out, and people losing, sort of any feeling of connectivity and all that. You don't have that in the restaurant business. And you have to, people are constantly, and you don't eat alone in a restaurant. You barely get any solitude for those hours you're there. And that could be a come down and an overstimulation and something. And similarly, you probably aren't alone on a set, It's a crew, and you're not alone and that's the beauty of acting, and what makes it really, you can bag on it, but when it's really done well, you're having private moments in public, and that's very hard to do. It's easy to learn your lines and just say things declaratively and maybe do even theater, but like if you do it right, it feels like the audience is peeping in, and where people get drawn in and can't believe it is, you really go there, or you really do the task, and you show what it would look like, through a peephole almost. Certainly, like in breakup scenes or intimate scenes, if you do them right, they give you that embarrassing feeling, or that and that's what we're going for, depending on the genre, etc. And so, 69, desire to communicate. We're in that week between this is certainly going to be the last 2026 episode. I kind of straddled. I didn't start or begin on any particular date, so it's not really like a new year, but I think it's been a calendar year of doing it over 69. So I guess I'm just curious what this will be, or what my next steps will be, how I'm going to use, quote unquote, the internet, and how I'm going to get my show produced, or what work may be even available out there. And I'm trying to hold on to hope, and that, I've been going to the gym. I've always said it, I don't have, quote unquote, as much momentum on the work front, but I've always said if January 1st is the day you're going to start a new habit, then you're fucked already. Because I've been going to the gym since I hurt my knee, since I hurt my ankle. I have momentum going into the new year. I'm going to be the guy at the gym who's pissed that it's busier because of the people joining the gym on January 1. And then I'm going to be looking forward to them flaking, because I'm not going to flake. I'm going to keep going. And, I need my fucking machines and all that stuff. So, but as the work front is still in limbo, and all the overthinking and over catastrophizing and all the articles of the Hollywood going the way of U.S. Steel, it's harder to be, what's the word, enthusiastic, or it's harder to be optimistic, but I am clinging to that. And, I guess you kind of got to make your own opportunity, and remember that, if it's about communicating something, and I guess that would be it, boil it down, find what you're trying to say, what is so important for you to say, that really any means necessary, that you'll use sign language, you'll point at a TV, you'll point at the menu, because the people can read even if they can't hear. There's many ways to communicate, and there's many ways to be heard, and there are many universal languages. And I've always fancied myself someone with a universal appeal, or a universal wish to bond, or be heard, or to be known, or to know somebody else. And so, maybe there's more than one universal language, because there's math, there's science, there's acting, even out of language, and there's music, and, so maybe not to fret at the coming technologies, but to know that it just is going to make someone who desires to communicate as much as I do, it's going to make it easier for me to do that, perhaps. So let's go headlong into 26 with some vim and some vigor, and I'm going to shut this down, and I got to head to the gym. All right, that's 69, le plume de maton sur le bureau de mon oncle. There's some more French for you. 69 in the can, Prince Albert in the can, let him out. 69, Carl D out.